Hello and welcome to No Confidence. I'm your host, David Merland. Nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis, believe it. This is my disclaimer. My last disclaimer was made like 9 years ago. It's September 16th of 2023. And yes, a disclaimer and an introduction to what I do. It's likely this is the first time you've heard of me. And I've been out there busy avoiding the tax honesty movement. My specialty is income tax law. And today I want to, on my way to showing you that an introduction to me is a fantastic disclaimer. Because I have beaten this thing to death, and you'll get nowhere even when you're arguing statutes that the government says control the situation. So, directly relevant statutes, and the government can't deny a word of the accusations that you make under the law. Can't deny it. Best tax attorneys in the world, Department of Justice. And instead they just shut their mouths and wait for the judge to give the judgment to the government. Isn't that easy? It's so easy to be a judge. So my disclaimer is in the form of an informed warning. You don't want a relationship with government. Sound like the tax honesty movement? No, they all have, you file this form, claim to be a resident of some different citizenship or whatever. Hey, you're a sovereign citizen. What did I do? Doesn't matter. You're a sovereign citizen. Oh, wow. Thanks. It's brutal out there. I use the simplest and most fundamental of tax statutes and regulations that, without question, govern the situation when somebody sells their labor for compensation as an employee or as a sole proprietor, independent contractor, so forth. Everybody. Section 83A explains how to tax the entire workforce. You can't have it. 5 times to the U.S. Supreme Court by 1998. And then another 3 trips to the Supreme Court. Those petitions I wrote in 2018. 2018. 3 petitions to the Supreme Court from the 7th, 9th, and 11th circuits. And these laws are a secret. And if you argue them, if you believe in these statutes, you're a sovereign citizen. You hear a lot of things out of government these days that are fantastic and delusional. Incredible statements. And it makes everything said in the past pale. But here's an example of who you're going to trust, the government. You can't have Section 83. I'm the only one that's ever written about it. And I wrote a manual about it in the first quarter of 1994. This is all old stuff. And still today, my original treatise from January of 94 has from time to time shut down IRS criminal investigations. Try that. Several times, the grand jury has refused to hand down an indictment in a tax criminal case when people start to employ the briefings that I made of my findings from 1994. So when you look at the tax honesty movement, gauge the caliber or quality of the teachings with knowledge that I've actually been to court with my stuff. I know everything the courts are going to do, what you can and can't have in relation to the statutes that I argue. The judge's job is to say what the law is, and you can forget it. not except those laws. We won't talk about those because in 1988, April 88, when the IRS had an attitude on my front porch, I thought I'd start studying tax law. So June of 88 and then December of 93, 5.5 years, I completed my analysis of the tax code and wrote my treatise on how the IRS violates the tax code. And they can't talk about it. I'll give you proof of it that in 2017, an exchange of briefs between me and the government's best tax attorneys on the 7th Circuit, they can't even mention the provisions that I argue. And they've had them since 1993, these arguments, starting litigation in the first quarter of 94. Right into tax court. About 30 people filed the argument into tax court. Five of them, maybe 6 of them stayed with me, and I wrote their appeals. And then 4 of those stayed with me, and I wrote Supreme Court petitions for them. The first thing I did in litigation. So I'm in court with the stuff that I claim is true to see what the government will do with full knowledge that you're going to lose the case. But you just might prevent somebody from going to prison by impressing the government with the fact that I know you're stealing, and I know how. Here's the brief, and I know you can't deny a word of it. Here's the Robert Orth case from the 7th Circuit, and you'll see they don't have a word to say about these provisions. Careful, hide your eyes. I'm about to make you a sovereign citizen. This is my 1994 treatise. 1 page. If you zoomed out and looked at it from the widest angle, these provisions prove those 3 points that are indented. Top of the page, the IRS, the DOJ, and the courts all refuse to discuss these provisions. And here they are. And it makes you a sovereign citizen. Anything but a whistleblower. Why? Because people listen to whistleblowers, and they don't want anybody listening to these. The judges won't talk about them. Period. You can't have it. Period. But when you look at the arguments, 4 or 5 of them that I can make out of these provisions, you stand back and you go, those crummy bastards, they're stealing every penny they get. In these provisions. These provisions prove these 3 points of law. Primary claims proven by these provisions. Number 1, Social Security is never applied to Americans. The government says, I'm a citizen of the United States. Okay, servant breath. Now let's see what the law says you can do to me. And when you get into the law, their way, sure, I'll be a citizen of the United States. I have so many protections in that tax code. When I'm a citizen of the United States, you can't stop me from being a citizen of the United States. Social Security is never applied to citizens of the United States. Citizens of the United States are expressly excluded by provisions of Social Security legislation. Number 2 there. Now that I cleared out Social Security, I'm left with only Chapter 1 of the tax code. Section 1 is where you find all the infamous tax brackets. So number 2, Tax Code Chapter 1, the only one left, does not identify U.S. citizens as the subject of an income tax. So how do you conclude that I owe anything in that chapter? And so the Secretary of the Treasury promulgated or wrote to have the force of law a regulation, 26 CFR 1.1-1, a mere regulation to identify Americans, citizens of the U.S., as the subjects of an income tax. The 16th Amendment says Congress can lay and collect this tax. It has to be a statute. And they can't even talk about that regulation when I argue that in regulation alone am I made liable for Chapter 1 graduated income tax when I sell my labor or when I make capital gains Americans were never named as a subject, so you wrote that regulation to make me a subject? It has to be a statute. The Secretary of the Treasury cannot identify the subject to be taxed. Number 3, pardon me. Under the law, all property is a cost. Labor is property. It's your most sacred and inviolable property, according to the Supreme Court. Under the law, all property is a cost. That would include personal services, because the law says the value of any money or property that I pay for my paycheck is a cost, including personal services, if you honor the language of the law. The IRS, DOJ, the courts have simply chosen to exclude personal services from cost without the lawful authority to lay a tax on the value of personal labor, personal services. That equals extortion and racketeering. In a pattern of conduct, they're stealing what they take from your paycheck. It's an income tax, so cost is deductible. And when you argue Section 83, and I'm the only one in the galaxy who does, they can't deny that Section 83 doesn't say the whole paycheck is gross income. It says the excess over the amount paid is gross income. Well, slow down. What's the amount paid? Regulation says the amount paid is the value of any money or property paid by me. The value of any money or property. Labor's property. Its value is what I can get under contract. And right here, 1.83-3G, the value of any money or property paid. The term any is all inclusive. I got 15 or 20 circuit cases that say so, 6 Supreme Court cases that say so. The term any is all inclusive, and they can't talk about that regulation, and that's been the case since 1993. 1.83-4B2. See, these are regulations under Section 83. 1.83-4B2 says to calculate the cost that Section 83 applies to, applies Section 1012. 1012 says your cost is cash or other property. And it doesn't say, except labor. It says cash or other property. The government can't talk about this statute either. And 1011 says the 1012 basis shall also be known as the adjusted basis. Okay, and then 1001, its regulation, first regulation says the adjusted basis shall be restored to the taxpayer. What's left constitutes the realized gain. The government doesn't reference this. It doesn't train on this. Nobody at the government will speak of this, and yet it's 4 statutes and several regulations that they simply ignore. When in fact the courts say Section 83 explains how to tax compensation. They simply took this little compartment, this equation of how to calculate the cost if you sold your labor, and they ignore it. You can't have it. We won't talk about it. And I've isolated it through all this litigation. 3 trips to the Supreme Court in 2018. That doesn't count the, let's say, probably 5 lawsuits under the Administrative Procedures Act filed in U.S. District Court, North Dakota, and North Carolina. U.S. District Court, Kentucky. A bunch of different lawsuits where these findings have been brought to bear, and the government runs from these provisions every single time. And I briefed them. So I offer a flash drive with tons of stuff, but at the top of it is a briefing of these findings. So number 1, Social Security is never applied to U.S. citizens. How do I know? Let me see. the definition of citizen in Social Security. These are, that's not the page I was looking for. Provisions. Number 1. You turkey. I'm sorry for this glitch. There's a, here we go. You have text below this video in the text box where you can read about the video. Read all of it. Social Security. I already referenced these provisions under Section 83 in the regulations. And then you get to 1401. Notice these provisions are numerically arranged. 1, 2, 3, 4 consecutively through 45. So don't let the fact it's a number confuse you. It's not a statute number or a regulation number. It's where on this list is this provision you see just to the left of that. And so I've got Section 212 there on the left-hand column. 212 says, in the case of an individual, there shall be allowed as a deduction all ordinary and necessary expenses paid or incurred in the production or collection of income. So that's the general statute that says cost is deductible. And then I get down to 1401. 1401 is in Chapter 2. Everything before it is in Chapter 1. So Chapter 2, definition of citizen, 1402B, excludes me. 1401A, old age survivors disability insurance, Social Security self-employed. B, hospital insurance, 1965, Medicare, Social Security. And then I have 3101, which is in Chapter 21, FICA. 3121E is a definition of citizen that expressly excludes citizens of the United States. 3101 is old age survivors and disability insurance. B is 1965 Medicare, hospital insurance. That's not a coincidence. Chapter 21, Section 3100s, is Social Security every bit as much as Chapter 2 is Social Security in the 1400s. 1401, 02, and 03. Chapter 2 is only 3 statutes long. So there's Social Security. 2 chapters. Self-employed, employee. And down here I have 7655, which says, for taxes imposed in the U.S. possessions, see Chapters 2 and 21. And they apply it to us despite the definition of citizen. 7651 5A. This is a 1995 document. 5A was amended to be 4A. 7651 4A, because they took out one of the entries, one of the paragraphs above number 5, and so now it's 7651 4A. And that says something fascinating that you can't escape. In 1939, we got a tax code. In 1954, they made it 10 times as voluminous and complicated, and they won't talk about it. 1954, 7651 5A or 4A says, any mention in Section 28A of the Revised Organic Act of the Virgin Islands to, quote, any tax imposed by Section 3811 of the Internal Revenue Code, end quote, shall be deemed to refer to Chapters 2 and 21. So now I have a statute, 7651 4A, that says when you see them mention Section 3811 of the Internal Revenue Code, they really mean Chapters 2 and 21. But they don't tell you this is the 1939 tax code, section 3811, that they're talking about. Because this tax code, the 1954 tax code, doesn't have a section 3811. So I went to the 1939 tax code to see section 3811, collection of taxes in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. A, Puerto Rico. B, Virgin Islands. That's the origin of Social Security. And in 1954, they split that statute up into chapters 2 and 21 that expressly exclude citizens of the United States, and they can't deny it. So Social Security 1401 and 3101 say there's hereby imposed upon the self-employment income or the employee income. It's a tax on income. Income is profit. You don't tax cost. And so Social Security is an income tax. How does Section 83 operate in your conclusion? I owe an income tax on the sale of my labor with an income tax like Social Security. They can't deny that argument either. So they ignore the definition of citizen in these chapters, and they ignore Section 83 to calculate the tax. And they can't deny any of this because I've been to court and been to court and been to court and been to court and can show you the docket numbers. And I do show you plenty of docket numbers in my work. Now, in 1939, where you have 1001, 11, and 12 up here in Chapter 1, where the basis is your cost. The predecessor sections from the 1939 tax code are 111, 12, and 13. Section 3640 is the predecessor section of 6201A, Assessment Authority. So all of this is tax law, right on the ground. The basis for the IRS's authority it claims to have over all of us. And when you get to looking at this list of provisions, it pulls their pants down, this list of provisions. So you're going to see in my work these provisions cited. Open this document, print it out, print the documents out that are in the text box under this disclaimer so you have them right at your disposal, because we're going to get into a couple. And when you see these explanations alluded to in my briefings, my YouTube videos, you're going to say, that's exactly what the tax code does, is the way I've explained it. And I've been to court 1,000,000 times against them. They can't deny it. This is about Social Security, Chapter 2 and Chapter 21. Imposition of tax in the possessions. For provisions imposing tax in the possessions, see Chapter 2 and 21. The Federal Insurance Contributions Act and Self-Employment Tax. Those are Social Security. They come from the 1935 Social Security Act. And here's 76515A, now it's 4A. Any reference in Section 28A of the Revised Organic Act of the Virgin Islands to a tax specified in 3811 of the Internal Revenue Code. And so I went to 3811. It doesn't exist. And I said the Virgin Islands have been around a lot longer than the 1954 tax code, so I went back to the 1939 tax code, Section 3811. Bingo. While we're at it, let's opening brief. Here we go. There's section 1 with all the tax brackets. It goes on for page after page after page, and they never identify Americans as the subject of the tax, so they wrote a regulation that says Americans owe this tax. There's Section 3811 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1939. Right there. A, Puerto Rico. B, Virgin Islands. And we have 7655 that says expressly that for taxes imposed in the possessions, see Chapters 2 and 21. It's all over. Social Security is for the possessions only, and it's an income tax. But the government ignores the definition of a citizen from those chapters, so they're violating it. extortion, racketeering, it shouldn't be applied to me. And they ignore the definition of citizen. They ignore the equation to figure your cost under Section 83. In the flash drive I offer, you get the ebook, Codebreaker, the Section 83 equation that I wrote in the first quarter of 94. Here we have Social Security definition of citizen. 1402B, an individual who's not a citizen of the United States. Okay, that excludes me. 3121E, Chapter 21, FICA, an individual who is a citizen of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, but not otherwise a citizen of the United States. Well, that's not me. And you get the same definition in Federal Unemployment Tax Act. Identical. And the one we should have here is 42 U.S.C. 411B2. This is his brief for the Seventh Circuit. Oh, I didn't include it. 42 U.S.C. 411B2. Let's do it to this one. 42 U.S.C. 411. This is the Social Security Act where they dispense the benefits. And the definitions from that chapter, I think it's chapter 7. There it is, chapter 7. 411B2 is the definition of citizen. The statute's called definitions. If they mention citizen, they're going to define citizen. So I scroll down to 411B2. Hat tip to Cornell University for maintaining this law library online. 411B2. Here we go. B. 2. Where are you? Here we go. 2. The net earnings from self-employment. If such net earnings for taxable years are less than $400. An individual who is not a citizen of the United States, but who is a resident of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. This is identical to Tax Code Social Security Chapter 2, 1402B. It's the same definition. It's the same definition that excludes me, not a citizen of the United States. Well, then that's not me. And argued together, these provisions reveal that truth. That you just can't subject me to Social Security, but they do it anyway. So if you don't know Social Security, you don't know the tax code. And I'm talking to the tax honesty movement. If you don't know Social Security, you don't understand the tax code. It's huge. And they study the Social Security chapters as if they're congruous with Chapter 1, when they aren't to be. And so you take them to court. 5 U.S.C. 706 tells the court what it has to do. To the extent necessary to decision and when presented, the reviewing court shall decide all relevant questions of law. No, we aren't. We aren't going to decide all relevant questions of law. They will violate this every time, right in front of you, because my findings prove they're stealing. The court shall interpret, when presented, not later, not in another lifetime, the reviewing court shall decide. This is a mandate. All relevant questions at law, interpret constitutional and statutory provisions, and determine the meaning or applicability of the terms of an agency action. The reviewing court shall compel the agency action if it's unlawfully withheld a duty or unreasonably delayed satisfaction as required. Number 2, the court shall hold unlawful and set aside an agency action, findings, and conclusions found to be arbitrary and capricious, an abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law. When have you seen a court decide something like that? and you take statutes that protect the tax man to court, you get none of this. B, if it's contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity, it shall be set aside. C, if it's in excess of statutory jurisdiction, authority, or limitations, or short of statutory right. You saw my treatise. It's all relevant tax provisions. You can't have this. D, without observance of procedure required by law. What's required by law? 6201A. The Secretary is authorized and required to make all inquiries, determinations, and assessments before they can lien and levy. Inquiries, determinations. A determination is a consideration of all relevant facts and statutes. And they refuse to even speak of the statutes I draw upon when we have all of this law that says they're supposed to. So you got 1401, old age survivors disability insurance for the self-employed, hospital insurance, and now number 2, additional tax. That's the health care bill. The health care bill is an amendment to the Social Security Act. I went through that 2,500-page piece of legislation, and half of it is an amendment to the Social Security Act, like Medicare was in 1965, hospital insurance. Isn't that handy? Yes, it's handy. And then I have 3101, wage, employee, Social Security, old age survivors disability insurance, just like Chapter 2. Social Security, FICA is Social Security. 3111 of the tax code. This is matching FICA. This is the statute that imposes on the employer. It says when your employee makes X number of dollars or pays X number of dollars in FICA, you have to match it with X number of dollars. So this is the matching FICA. It's in Chapter 21. Same chapter as wage FICA. This is the employer FICA. 3301, Federal Unemployment Tax Act. Funny thing about 3301 is 3306J. 3306J has the same definition. Oh, it's not in this brief. I'll do that over here. 3306J. That's 3101. 3306J. You're going to recognize this guy, and this is in Federal Unemployment Tax Act. 3306J. Let's do this the fast way. Find J. Where are you, you turkey? Three 3306J. 3306J. State, United States, and American employer. Okay. And then you have, like I said, if they mention definition, they're going to define, if they mention citizen, they're going to define citizen. 3306J, the definition of citizen for the purposes of the Federal Unemployment Tax Act. In Chapter 23 of the Tax Code, an individual who is a citizen of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands, but not otherwise a citizen of the United States. It excludes me. Everybody else has argued the definition of state and United States. And they said, Washington, D.C. has no authority out here. I'm in the 50 states. I'm a non-resident alien to Washington, D.C. And it sidetracked a couple of million people by now over time into the wrong arguments. If you argue only the definitions of citizen in those chapters, Social Security falls away. 7651, 4A, Section 3811 of the Internal Revenue Code is Chapters 2 and 21. And then this one, 7655, for taxes imposed in the possessions, see Chapters 2 and 21. In the possessions, it's not about the 50 states. And when you 86 Social Security, You're left with just Chapter 1. Chapter 1 doesn't name a citizen subject, so they wrote a regulation. It's not Congress. It's the Secretary of the Treasury wrote a regulation to make citizens of the U.S. liable. And so, if you work as an employee in the U.S., you must pay Social Security and Medicare taxes in most cases. That means 3101A and 3101B, Medicare. And it's Social Security. Oh, your payment of these taxes contribute to the coverage under the U.S. Social Security system. Okay. So, Social Security, FICA. FICA is Social Security. Taxes under the Federal Insurance Contributions Act are composed of the old age, survivors, and disability insurance, also known as Social Security. We saw that in Chapter 21. Old age. Yeah, I'm retired. I get benefits. Survivors. Oh, your spouse collected Social Security. Now they've passed on. You're a survivor. And disability insurance. I'm disabled. I get Social Security disability. SDI. So, yeah, Chapter 21, FICA, is Social Security. As you work and pay FICA taxes, you earn credits for Social Security benefits. Why would you earn those benefits if FICA didn't apply to citizens of the United States? And we have tax code. The search is tax code 26 U.S.C. Social Security imposed. And the results on this were very poor as far as telling you which chapters impose Social Security. But here it says 3101. That's Chapter 21, FICA. Okay. I'm comfortable with my allegation that Chapter 21, FICA, is Social Security. 3111, matching FICA for the employer. It's no big mystery. I think these links are in the text in the window under this video. Best of luck, maybe not. General definitions of terms, 31.0-2A1. The terms defined in the provisions of law contained in the regulations in this part shall have the meaning so assigned to them. Well, Part 31 of the regulations, under the tax code, happens to be employment taxes. That would include Chapter 21. And here's a provision in the regulations that says the definitions have the meaning so assigned to them. Okay. Thank you. Things you got to know, folks. The information is out there. Internal Revenue Code. Nice. Here's a guy who wrote a book called Shattering the Myths. And this page is at the justice.gov, Department of Justice website, saying, yeah, January 30th of 2012, we sued him to shut down sales of that book because he's wrong. Casetext.com. Here's the text of the case against him, shutting down his sale of The Income Tax, Shattering the Myths. Okay. And here's a page, don't mess with taxes. Don't use the word tax on me until you can explain Section 83 of the tax code to me. How do you like that? Things you got to know. There's a lot of pages about frivolous arguments out there, and I've proven that even when you're arguing just the law that governs Section 83, you're frivolous. Without merit, we got to penalize them, Your Honor. Thousands of dollars. That's the caution that I bring to this introduction and disclaimer, is that you can't have the law. It's off limits. You'll be penalized thousands of dollars for trying it. And I've given you all the proof of that right here in this tutorial, this introduction. And this would be Richard Boggs of Irmo, North Carolina. He was a plaintiff in 4 lawsuits that I wrote for people. He joined as a plaintiff or he filed as an original co-plaintiff. 4 lawsuits. And then he wrote 5 of his own arguing my findings and the statutes from my treatise, and took 3 of his own, of those 5, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they wouldn't answer any questions. They don't train on Section 83. You can't have Section 83. And if you bother us about it, we're going to penalize you thousands of dollars and all this other great stuff. In a tax evasion trial, to put him in prison. And in all of that litigation, he never received any discussion of statutes. He argued my conclusions. And a prosecutor, Mr. Potterfield, in North Carolina, went to a grand jury and told the grand jury he's willful. He willfully evaded taxes. Willful means you have a legal duty, and that you believe you have a duty, and that you failed to perform the duty. He sued all of those times as a plaintiff, named in the lawsuit, named as the lead plaintiff, or maybe the only plaintiff in his lawsuits, 3 of which he took to the Supreme Court. So the statement to the grand jury that he willfully evaded taxes is a lie. He wasn't willful at all. As he stated in his pleadings after he was found guilty, if the government would have just proven I owed the tax, I would have paid it, I'd have gone back to work, and I'd have filed tax returns. But you'd rather have me in prison than out earning a living for my family? That's exactly the position that he put himself in. He and we sued and sued and sued and sued, and the government will not speak of those provisions in my 1994 treatise. It's that bad. This is the caution portion of your introduction to me, is that I'm not saying you can get your money back. I'm not saying you won't have to file tax returns. I'm saying you cover your ass or you go to prison. Almost no matter what you do. The judiciary is so overtly corrupt, they will not give you a decision on the issues like they're required under 5 U.S.C. 706. All these lawsuits invoked 706. And they would rather lie to a grand jury and put you in prison than admit they don't even train on Section 83. How do you like that? Just nod your head and say, yes, Citizen Breath. You are a possession of the government. The government is not a strict cop. The government is a carjacker with pistols and prisons. And nobody in government cares about how unjust it is to do this to you. They send innocent people to prison all of the time. 1988, the IRS ticked me off. It's 35 years later. I've been looking at this for a long, long time. And they don't care. Now, there's a particular document. Robert Orth, full appeal, 7th Circuit, 2017. And here are the arguments. Let's see, Table of Authorities, Brief of the Issues. Separate, page 29. Let's do this. Brief of the Issues. Page 1, Brief of the Issues, it's a separate brief, and so the page numbers begin again, page 1 of 29. And here are the exhibits. It tells a story because he had tried administratively, vigorously, to get the answers he needed, and they wouldn't answer any questions. So in tax court, he reserved the right to make these arguments because he knew tax court would penalize him. So he raised them on the Seventh Circuit level when he filed his appeal. And you find me in here where they explained Section 83. I had him in exactly the position I told him I'd have him in this litigation. I wrote his tax court pleading, reserving the issues, and here they are, introduced to the Seventh Circuit, and they penalized him $4,000 for arguing the law and didn't answer any of his questions. Didn't put aside with cogent refutation any of the allegations in this brief. This briefing, that means it's written like an attorney would write. This is a luxury for you to have it already argued by someone who's been to court many, many times on the argument. This is a luxury. Definition of citizen is Social Security. That's not me. 411B2, out of the Social Security Benefits chapter in Title 42, Human Services. This is funny, because I got him in exactly the position I knew I would. And then here's issue B. Now that we've disposed of chapters 2, 21, and 23, we're left with just chapter 1, a citizen of the United States. And it argues that I was only named in regulation. If I was going to be named as a subject to the tax, it would be in statute like they did here in Social Security. So the brief tells a story about the laws that apply. And here's the regulation they wrote, because they don't have anything in Section 1, the graduated income tax, all the tax brackets, that said citizens of the U.S. owe this tax. So they wrote this regulation that says citizens of the U.S. owe this tax. Gotcha. Stung them. I'm the only... it originates with me. I've seen one person plagiarize it and use this argument in one of the documents coming out of their law office, one of the tax movement gurus. Other than that, you won't find this argued but in my work. The regulation deviates from statute. And C. Let's see. I've been deprived of the provisions of Section 83, 212, 1001, 11, and 12. Here we go. You can't deny Section 83 explains how to tax the entire workforce. Read the brief. You got the brief in the links below this video. This is wevgov.com/orth, capital O, small RTH. And then if you can't explain it, it must be void for vagueness. And the void for vagueness argument is written for you. So the document tells a story about the law, and in the law there is a story. The government can't deny a word of any of this. I've already been to court on it. What do you want? And so there's my treatise, and there's proof that I've argued it and argued it. And right here, wevgov.com/orth, ORTH. Here are the exhibits that we've been through today. Number 1 is provisions, that list of provisions, numerically arranged. This page is a tutorial about the exchange in 2017 between me and the government in the Orth case. And you see the government's reply to his opening brief. And there's an audio tutorial linked from that page. There's a YouTube video about that case. And look at the exchange of briefs between me and the government when they had had the arguments for 26 years. They can't talk. 26 years of the same provisions. and I clobbered him. And so no discussion of the law. The government gets the judgment, and the appellate court penalized him $4,000. That's called mail fraud. All this was done through the mail. And for arguing the law like he's supposed to, they milked him for $4,000. So, disclaimer, this is not legal advice. Get my flash drive. It's not for Mac. Leave your name and address. You go to bgbgbg.us, and it'll give you a link to a video about the flash drive. It has a written table of contents on that homepage, and there'll be a link to the PayPal channel or address, so you can pay the $200 when you leave your name and address. And I'll send you out the flash drive usually the next day. I talk a good game. Yeah, he's got a big bad attitude and he really thinks he's something. I'm talking about putting tools in your hands. You go take this tutorial. That's an order. This is required reading. And listen to what I did to that California State Superior Court judge, because she falsely arrested a guy for contempt of court. The 2-minute hearing is in the recording, in the tutorial, and you can hear the cuffs go on and everything. The next one is the address to my YouTube channel, Take from Caesar. I'm on Instagram, just got that Instagram channel, Drive By Litigation. Print these visual aids for this introduction and caution from yours truly, David Merland. I don't want anybody going to prison. You got to be careful before you form a relationship with this government by failing to file and failing to pay. You have to be careful. Get your wife in front of the computer. I'll talk to her. Make him be careful. Your asses and your home are number one. Keep them. Tax Honesty Movement star, David Champion. He has a PhD in something utterly unrelated to tax law. So who cares about your PhD? You're out there writing a book 409 pages long, shattering the myths. And then you have these other links that we already went over on Firefox. Is Social Security, is FICA Social Security? Which brings me back to the Tax Honesty Movement star. We know that FICA is Social Security. Now let's hear from David Champion.
Let's quickly look at some statutes in which Congress has distinguished between the different meanings of state. In 26 U.S.C. 3121E1, dealing with FICA, that most Americans incorrectly believe is Social Security tax.
So that's what you get from the Tax Honesty Movement. I was done with my research in 1993. I wrote my treatise in 94. And I got it right the first time. And I've been to court on it tons of times. U.S. District Court, the best attorneys in the government. This guy has not been to court, and you can tell by the way he favors statutory definitions that say the term citizen includes or the term state includes. You stay away from definitions that use the term includes. That'll get you in trouble with every court. They don't care that it's called a definition. They enforce it as if it were an inclusion. Even though it doesn't mention you, they apply it to you. There's a bunch of definitions in the tax code like that. So you stay away from the term includes. And he speaks of those definitions with all the confidence in the world that, like, he would win if he went into court saying this definition excludes me because it doesn't mention me. And the courts are going to go, yeah, but it uses the term includes. That means it includes everybody, which means they enforce it as an inclusion instead of as a definition. But he doesn't even feel any angst or apprehension about drawing upon a statutory definition that uses the term includes. He's a junior. And according to him, Section 83 is a nonsense argument. Well, you have the exchange of briefs in the Robert Orth case. The government can't deny a word of it. Who are you, Mr. Champion? Go get a job. The Department of Justice needs you terribly. Because every time they face my findings, I twist them around a telephone pole and knock them off the road. They can't deny these findings. Why wouldn't you want to know these arguments that prove extortion and racketeering on the part of the government? The sovereign citizen protester movement or whatever. Now you're a sovereign citizen. How does it feel? You looked at the law. You found some things that intrigue you. Are they stealing Social Security? How did the definition of citizen operate in your conclusion that I should pay Social Security? I'm a citizen of the U.S., according to the Gov. It's the law. It imposes a burden. I have a right to rely on the letter of the law. If I'm wrong, I have a right to be told how I am mistaken. They can't. You have the proof. So, the tax honesty movement has had forever. And there's organizations, groups, and gurus out there that have a plaque on the wall of some sort from the rings of Saturn or a paralegal school or something, and they never did the work. You get into my tax work, 5.5 years worth of research and analysis, and you see I've come up with these provisions. And it has stayed that way. A 1994 treatise. I did it once. I came up with some answers. I found some stuff. I can explain some things that are contrary to standard operating procedure. I got places when I devoted my faculties to understanding the tax code. You know, on the flash drive, there is so much more than, and I could stand here and berate David Champion all day for as stupid as that mistake is about FICA, that it's a mistake to think that it's Social Security. Yeah, okay, Captain. But there's a lot more on the flash drive. I went into other law once I arrived at my conclusion that federal law is futile, 5 times to the Supreme Court by October of '98, and got nowhere. So I gravitated towards state law, traffic court, motor vehicle code, of course, and did a bunch of work there and kept piling on little things on top of my knowledge, and you end up with a list of things that the government has to do correctly to win a case. And so you keep that list fresh in your mind when you get a traffic ticket, when you get pulled over for apparently no reason, when the cops search you and take your cell phone and open it and look at your contacts, or worse. I got news for you, folks. That's not phone theft. That's called computer trespass. It's a Class C felony here in Washington State. Across the United States, you have the right to arrest a felon if you know of a felony. Some states might require that the felony be one committed in your presence. But here in Washington, if you know of a felony, you have rights to arrest that person. So why wouldn't you want to know who is and is not a felon? Study the criminal code. I didn't get any respect until I started filing criminal complaints against public servants. And then things were different. So read the criminal code. When I started to read the criminal code, and this is like 1999, well, I was way into the game, and I said, holy smokes, this is their home address. Because I was in this flow of information from victims across the United States, taking impromptu conference calls 2 nights a week for 2 hours each night, 4 hours a week, impromptu conference calls and questions from victims of the system and its abuses. At the same time, I was writing pleadings. I could walk around with 7 different clients' cases in my head I knew their deadlines. I knew what had to be filed next. I knew what arguments I was going to have to make. And I was managing cases for people who couldn't afford attorneys. And then I run into a mistake like David Champion's, like, ay. All the people that go to prison for falling in with people who haven't done the work. I obviously have done more research than David Champion. I understand the courts, and he does not. And I can show you, you can't have the law. It's meaningless. You can throw a few statutes at the IRS, and they might not seek an indictment. They might shut down a criminal investigation because you'd be a tough one to convict. You've got the wrong kind of questions and allegations to make when it comes time to get you in front of a trial jury. That's who you have to try to be if you're not going to do it H&R Block's way. Pardon me. So I'm preaching reality. Don't try to get your money back. Try to keep the government utterly out of your lives. It's the key to happiness. You can quote me. Now, I gravitated into other law. September 1st of 2001, 10 days before the towers came down. September 1st of 2001, there was a decision in Oregon, Klamath County Circuit Court. It's the county superior court where they would try felonies. And there was a civil suit. The state attorney general was suing 5 citizens who were in a gifting club. And gifting clubs were prosecuted and sued as pyramid promotional schemes, endless chains, across the United States. Course number 1 on my flash drive is, am I guilty? That's a great first course to take, isn't it? How do I look at statute? How do I know if the government's full of it? And in 33 states, I analyzed 33 states' statutes on pyramid schemes and found out that gifting clubs didn't violate any of those statutes in the 33 states that I looked at. They were innocent. And so I wrote professional opinions. I lectured in 15 states in 2001, 2002. And I got the only victory for a gifting club member or promoter in the entire United States in Klamath County Court, Klamath County, Oregon. I got the only victory in the country. Writing for people practicing law without a license. They couldn't afford an attorney, and they filed a petition for a declaratory judgment saying, we're not breaking the law, are we? And the state countersued Attorney General Hardy Meyer, countersued, and their advocate that wrote that lawsuit ran away. And so I said, yeah, I'll take the case. I got 4 out of 5 defendants dismissed for a lack of willfulness. The only victory in the United States. It can be done. You're going to get more of it if you move away from the Fed. The Fed wins all cases, basically. And if you get into state and municipal actions, you stand a better chance, especially if you're prone to or given to writing and filing citizens' criminal complaints. That I could always tell a different scent to the litigation after the judge realized I write great criminal complaints. So I went into other areas of law. The one in Oregon, that was under the Unfair Trade Practices Act, Pyramid Promotional Scheme. And I beat the Attorney General of Oregon State. and you might get a traffic ticket dismissed. You'll be hard-pressed to make a big difference, but you might get some remedy more often than you do with the federal government, especially with a tax man. And if you got a state tax man, the state tax man will always win. When there's money involved, the government always wins. That's the rule, but if you want to take them on, you have to be ready to fight tooth and claw. And no one's got the briefs like I do about the operation of the federal tax code. Even inside of a state, a bunch of states that impose a state income tax say, we figure ours the same way as you do under the federal Internal Revenue Code. Well, that pretty much makes Section 83 of the tax code state law. And they run from it, just like the Fed runs from it. So a bunch of different areas of law and a bunch of different types of pleadings, and there are a few tactics that rise to the top that I think everybody should learn and know and be ready to wield when you're getting the raw treatment from government. It could be a zoning inspector that trespassed on your land so they could write you up with a ticket. It could be a police officer that's trying to meet a quota of traffic tickets, and so you get something that's trumped up. Michael Idland. He was a Washington State highway patrolman who, in his patrol car on shift, would stake out cocktail lounges. And when a pretty lady leaves the cocktail lounge, probably alone, goes to her car, he would follow her car out onto the highway and pull her over and manually molest women that he would pull over, take them to the jail, molest them again. And I don't mean fornication, but we got to search you again before you can go into this room type stuff. And there was an FBI affidavit from an FBI agent who interviewed 7 of the ladies, the victims, and they told specifically in some instances of what this guy was pulling on him. He, in the meantime, was in lockup in King County Superior Court had the case, and that's in Seattle. And he was in King County Jail pending trial, and then was offered a plea agreement after 18 months. 18 months in custody, and he pled guilty to custodial interference, which was a misdemeanor, so he wouldn't have to register as a sex offender in the future. They gave him a red carpet. He was paid administrative leave the whole time he was in jail. And every woman in America got screwed by that judge that would let him plead out to a misdemeanor. Just outrageous. A gross misdemeanor, maximum a year in jail, but not felony. So he doesn't have to register as a sex offender. Got the red carpet, even though he was doing it. He was guilty. So you might not get remedy, you might get some, you might get a lot, but learn where those buttons are. The remedy button. I might get remedy if I push this button or that. Another good example, the Real ID Act of 2004. When you apply for a driver's license, you have to supply your social security number. But there's a clause in the Real ID Act that said, unless you provide verification that you're ineligible for a social security account. Well, I got these definitions of citizen right here. That pretty much proves it's not me, and I swear to it under penalties of perjury. That means it's verified proof. I swore to it. And so if I ask for a driver's license, I would present them with an affidavit that shows I'm not eligible for a social security account. Now give me that license. So that's a little bit of remedy. There might be stuff at the end where remedy is huge. False arrest, unreasonable seizure. I was in custody for 2 days. You should have known better. And here's my lawsuit. And they're going to settle out. Here's $50,000. So remedy could be big. Remedy could be small. But you learn where remedy is. And then you sort through that list of reasons the government loses cases. Try to match it up to your facts. And go get your remedy. You play defense first. You keep yours out of the fire first. And then when the dust clears, you go on the offense. And you do it with criminal complaints. I like criminal complaining. Learn what a prosecutor does to put somebody in jail. You could stand over here at one table, you're the defendant, and I got a 15-page brief filed on record against the prosecutor and some exhibits. And I have a motion to dismiss. And the prosecutor's over there on the other side of the aisle at their table, and they got 1 page with 1 paragraph on it and a caption, and they send me to jail with it. How the hell did you do that? And so you start studying the cop's job. So you know if the cop is relying on the prosecutor to help him. Then you study the prosecutor's job. So you know if the prosecutor is relying on the judge to help him. And then you study the judge's job. That's called case law. You can't read too much case law. So that you know in a certain instance, this is what a judge is supposed to do. I filed a discovery request on the prosecutor, Your Honor, and they haven't responded to it yet. It's been 60 days. Trial is in 2 days. Motion to dismiss. They've mishandled discovery. Because I got case law that says mere mismanagement of discovery is grounds for dismissal. I pretty much fit that description, don't I? So there's a little bit of remedy because I have something on my checklist that says I should get remedy, mismanagement of discovery. And depending on who you are, you can gather a great big list of reasons the government should lose. And I was in this real, full time for several years, so I got a list. But there are people that can just chew me to shreds with a list of everything the government has to do correctly. And I don't want to have to dig that deeply. I'm innocent. I shouldn't have to have a DNA test and a traffic stop. So it never gets to the point where I have to use real creative stuff. There's a few things I do very well, but it's not like I'm looking for something every day to stick it to the man. I'm just looking to stay away from the man. Oh, man. So an introduction to Dave, yours truly, is your disclaimer. There's no such thing as legal advice. It depends on the judge and what day of the month it is, or something. You can't predict corruption, so there's no guarantee you'll be dismissed. You go in and you make your best argument. But other than that, try to stay away. Is it worth your time, money, and emotional energy and effort to take on that traffic ticket when it's not a moving violation? Should you just pay it? That way you keep the city out of your life. And you put it on the scale. Is it worth it? Should I just, pay it, move on, choose my battles? Or is it something big? Did the cop falsely arrest your wife simply because she said, I want to see your ID from the police department? Well, that cop's got it coming. Criminal complaints. When would be a good time to arrest you, officer? You committed unlawful imprisonment. That's a Class C felony in this state, and I can arrest you. When would you like to be arrested? And then on the civil side, you want to get the cop's condo, the cop's speedboat, and pickup truck. So there are certain instances where you let it go. Just let it go. And other instances where you go, I didn't take that course on criminal complaints for nothing. Give me my computer. Get out of the way. And sit down on your computer and make some criminal complaints. make up a case, and then go to my courses on that flash drive and learn how to write a criminal complaint, and then write a phony criminal complaint against cops that don't exist, and see how well you do in an imaginary city with an imaginary city's name in the caption. And is it a felony you're complaining of? Well, then it'll be a criminal complaint for superior court. Whatever. Make up your own scenario, your own situation, and practice. What would I do if XYZ happened? If the police impounded my car and didn't tell me where it was, so I lost it at an auction. Well, I better be suing for the value of that car, but I should file criminal complaints for automobile theft. Because it worked like a charm. My car is gone. So there are great causes to go get remedy. There are a bunch of different sources of remedy, large and small. And you look at, when you take my courses, you listen to all these corners I've been forced into for my own controversies and for that of any particular client. I can't count the number of people I've spoken to about the crap that government pulls on them. And that stands out when you look at an example of the different arguments I've had to write in different courts, state and federal, and against the local cops, against the zoning officer for the county or whatever, the dog catcher, all of these different places. And you go into it, and a lot of times you find out that, wow, what business did the government have bringing charges against me? I was obviously innocent. Look at the statute that they charged me with. You're going to find a lot of those cases. And then you take your list out, play defense, get out of the trouble, but then decide, do you want to sue them over it? Should I file criminal complaints to soften them up? And if you get my flash drive, you got all the courses on it. A bunch of great Microsoft Word templates. None of this is legal advice, but I didn't get any respect until I started filing criminal complaints of my own against judges and prosecutors. So caution. There's your introduction to yours truly, Dave Merland. And my conclusions come from experience, not from reading a bunch of statutes and sitting back and thinking about it. We saw what happened to David Champion when he did that. FICA is not Social Security. Yeah, point of order. You have to spare me. And you look at my career, if you will. 1988, the IRS, I didn't like the way they acted. 2 months later, June of 88, I started studying tax law. January of 94, I completed my treatise. So in 94, I was done with my tax research. And when you look among the tax honesty movement or whoever, find somebody that did their research that early. I'm the grandfather of the tax honesty movement. As people die off or retire, Lowell B. Kraft, he wants to retire. I don't think he's doing tax cases anymore. He's a Huntsville, Alabama attorney. And then you have others that can't even go to court, couldn't find their law dictionary with both hands. David Champion is one of them. He probably started after 1994. So I go way back, and I got it right with my first trip through the tax code. I took several years and slowly crunched all those provisions that I studied, and I made arguments where I sensed that there was an argument to make. And I came up with a list of really heavy lifting arguments that make the government say, we're not going to talk about those statutes, especially in front of a criminal trial jury. And sometimes you can get a letter from the IRS, Criminal Investigations Division, that says, We're writing you to inform you that you're no longer the subject of a criminal investigation, but we might come back after you for tax returns and back taxes. That's fine. Just don't put my bacon in prison, right? But that's all the remedy you can hope for with our system. They go to grand juries and they lie about you. And personally, I would want to be on record in grand style saying, now, don't run off to a grand jury and lie to them and tell them that I'm willful. I don't have a duty. You know it. I know it. You can't even talk about the law. So grand jury has nothing to do with this until you have a reasonable suspicion that I believe I have a duty, when I know it could never be reasonable. With my record, January 1st of 2006, 80 members of Congress received a 180-page document from me. Cost me like $6,000 to print it, notarize it, ship it. 80 members of Congress, 180-page document. 33 pages of that was a racketeering complaint. 58 pages of it was a memorandum. 12 pages of it was a notarized cover letter with a bulldog clip on top. 80 members of Congress. So picture that in front of a criminal tax trial jury. Did you try to convince the government that you didn't believe you had a duty? Yeah, this went to 80 members of Congress. Right here in this thing, it says 10 times, these are my conclusions, and until you dispel them with cogent refutation, I'll continue to act upon them. They've never replied to it. New Year's of 2006. And over 300 people have joined that complaint saying I'm a similarly situated witness to crime. Add me and put my favorite IRS agent's name on that complaint. I'm complaining about them. And it became their complaint. They joined it as a similarly situated complainant. And when they present that to a grand jury, sometimes the grand jury has failed to hand down an indictment. When they give that to the Criminal Investigations Division of the IRS, sometimes that division has told the taxpayer, we're not investigating you anymore. So remedy can be big and remedy can be small. But look at all the hoops I have to jump through just to do what I do. It's obvious that I've had to look really hard for the places where you can get remedy, and then devote a lot of time to the memorandums, the other documents that one might use to obtain any such remedy. Maybe commutation of sentence or pardon of sentence on a tax criminal charge. You never know. So you rack up the places where government loses, and you look around and you'll see examples of where the government should have lost, and yet the government's putting that guy in prison, like Richard Boggs. He had sued and sued and sued, and they still went to a grand jury and called him willful. So you can't predict corruption, but you can make a good case for yourself if you're not going to get in the system and stay there. You really want to be able to walk through an airport and not be arrested by the feds because you didn't file a tax return. Because, man, let's say you live in Philadelphia and you take a plane trip to the Yucatan Peninsula, Cancun. And in the Cancun Mexican International Airport, the feds arrest you. So you're already buried up to other people's asses in trouble. You're in another country on a charge you can't even talk about to anybody. And the Fed will tell Mexico how long to keep you before the Fed will fly you back to Philadelphia. and keep you in custody because you're a flight risk. Just took a trip to Mexico, Your Honor. He's in and out of the country. And they'll hold you pending trial after spending a month in a Mexican prison. You never know. Look what they're willing to do to people. Michael Flynn. Richard Boggs. So be wise, study. I'll teach you about your relationship with government, but I'm not telling you you'll get your money back, and I'm not telling you you can totally avoid prison, because in America, the law doesn't count. When the government wants you, the government will take you. So there's my introduction to yours truly. A caution to put your feet on the ground, and a disclaimer. This David Champion is at the top of the tax honesty movement. I'm totally removed from it. He's at the top of it with Pete Hendrickson, and look at how wrong he is about the nature of income taxes. Social Security doesn't include FICA. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. He stopped his research way too early. He didn't look about to see what other research was available, or he'd have come across mine somewhere, and he would have had to evolve. But instead, he's got his book. I've seen it for sale for $300. I've seen it for sale for $50. Shattering the Myths, the Income Tax. And I come out of there with a myth of, I got a copy of that book. Someone sent it to me. I told him, I'll review his book. I'll give you a book review of it, but I'm not buying the book so I can review it. If you buy it for me, I'll review it. And I get the book. It's 400 pages. You got to spare me. And then I find a mistake like this, and I got to wonder, why review his book? 2/3 of the things that affect every paycheck are outside of his understanding. FICA is not part of Social Security. Yes, it is. So should I even bother myself with reviewing his book? This is a huge mistake. It's 40% of what you need to understand to even say reasonably you got a handle on the tax code. And then you go into other areas of law. I got a real sharp pen. I've been a lot of places. I got some unique victories. And I'm not out there going, take on the man, be somebody, go kick their butts. You got to walk on eggshells, because government has never been further from accountability as you see it today. And it's only going to get worse. The police state. And yeah, you might get your case dismissed in front of the judge. What came first? Oh, there's the arrest where the cop punched you in the stomach. There was the arrest where they took your car and didn't tell you what tow company they took it to. There was the arrest where they intentionally bumped your head on the door of the patrol car when they put you in there in handcuffs. There's the other stuff that they might pull in jail, impose a bail that's going to keep you in there for a week before you can raise the bail. There's a lot that can happen before you get your case dismissed. First thing you ask for when they close the jail door, I want a pencil and paper, please. And you start writing your arguments. You can't count on a thing. And the good cop, he still doesn't rat out his coworkers when they misbehave. Well, how good a cop is that? So be careful. Stay away from them. Watch what they do. Pay what they say you owe unless you're ready to keep everything you have safe and secure and battle them. And for anybody watching this that's new to income tax arguments, or even if you're even well versed with some of these people in the tax honesty movement, you've gotten a few pointers today. No IRS agent can even speak to you when you say, oh, you want money out of me? All I did was sell my labor. How did Section 83 operate in your conclusion I owe an income tax on my paycheck? They can't talk to you about it. They don't study it. They've never heard of it. They couldn't interpret it if you put it in front of them. Same for their bosses. But the supervisors know. On the witness stand, 2007 maybe, in the case of U.S. versus Raymond Gebauer, IRS Special Agent Sue Besson, on the witness stand at his failure to file tax returns trial. And the defense counsel that I had tutored asked her, how did Section 83 operate in your conclusion he owes a tax? And she says, I am unfamiliar with Section 83. She's a special agent. She knows all about it. She was told to lie. Anything but getting into a conversation about Section 83. So it explains how to tax all the compensation that the guy made. She's unfamiliar with it, and she's participating in his prosecution. And you think you're going to get justice in America? That was in open court. I was sitting right there. I watched it. I am unfamiliar with Section 83. Section 6201A, Assessment Authority. The Secretary is required to make all inquiries, determinations, and assessments. A determination is a consideration of all relevant facts and statutes. She didn't consider Section 83. She's unaware of it. She said so. And the man still went to jail. Federal prison, failure to file. And you think you're going to win an argument with the Fed? You need to keep them away from you. Even the not the run-of-the-mill, but the rank and file IRS employee, or even cops, inspectors, whatever. Because even if they're righteous about their job, their employers' abuses of discretion and their tendencies are right behind them. They bring their boss with them every time they pick up a pen. So don't relax. They might be pleasant, personable, and they might have their heart in the right place. They have their boss's authority right behind them, and their boss likes to abuse their authority. So just don't. There's my introduction, my caution to all of you, and my disclaimer. My name is David Merlin. None of this is legal advice. Believe it. Again, it is September 16th of 2023, and I'll be sticking more on this channel. You got some neat documents to look at, a few links to pursue. Read the text that's below this video, and go to bgbgbg.us for a written table of contents of the flash drive, with the understanding that it's only $200. All those documents in Microsoft Word with audio instruction. You're getting a treasure trove of documents and tactics that result from years of my willing participation in other people's cases, trying to help them. I helped a lot of people. I couldn't help everybody, but I was always right in the face of the government, confronting the government with the truth and with the law. And a few things come to the very top of the heap, like criminal complaints. You can't beat criminal complaints. Once you got a good criminal complaint with exhibits on file in court or with the cops, you have your copy date stamp received. That's when you start complaining to the State Bar Association about the prosecutor. You complain to the State Commission on Judicial Performance about the judge's misconduct. You complain to the cop shop if it's conduct of a policeman you want to complain about, and start trying to get somebody fired. get these documents on the record in their employment file. There's a lot you can do without winning a case in court and without having to answer motions from the government, criminal complaints. You file it and you walk away, and then you follow it up with letters saying, here's why I'm complaining. Under the State Disclosure Act, I want a copy of the paperwork that explains what you did with my complaint when you received it. What officer did you assign it to? What opinions were written by Sheriff's Department staff when you looked at my criminal complaint? And there, I'm not even in court, but I'm probing them for documents that prove they're doing their job, or a lack of documents that prove they're not doing their job. There are a lot of places you can get remedy, and it doesn't always mean it goes your way. It might only go against the sheriff's deputy that you know stole that real nice pocket knife out of your glove box when you were pulled over. You might get somebody fired, reprimanded. They might hold a meeting in the back room of the precinct where all the cops get together and listen to the guy up front, badge and blues, and he says, now there's a couple complaints here from citizens that in traffic stops, police are stealing their personal effects. And we're here to go over what you have to do in every traffic stop and give a lecture to them. And the guys that are guilty of stealing, they know who they are. So you got them a little bit closer to the fire. You never know what'll happen. But remedy can be small and remedy can be big. Keep a list in your head of what the government has to do to win a case and what the government commonly does that means the case will be dismissed. And get ready for battle, because if they can't handle you with the law, they'll handle you without the law. Government is not a strict cop. Government is a carjacker with pistols in prisons. I want everybody to stay out of jail. I want everybody to keep their property, but at the same time, you have to keep your sanity. And so you might have to cough up a little bit of property to keep the tax man off your front porch. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. My name is David Merland. 6'9" in the high jump, 1977. 48 feet in the triple jump, 1978. Slam dunking basketballs at halftime NBA games for the Pepsi Dunk team. Super jock. World's fastest bartender, 1985. 1988, I met the IRS. It's 35 years now that I've been in the battle to keep the government's boot off the neck of the innocent. Where does life go? You know, I've lost some hair since this point in time. It's harder to smile than it was back then. But I fought the good fight. Law, law, law. Just the way the attorneys have to do it. I'm not in any movement. All my work was independent of everybody else. And I'm here to warn you that if you're ignorant of the law and you take on government, you just accepted two learning curves. Learning the law to protect yourself and learning how to control your emotions so you can learn the law. Because once the government's breathing on you, it's really tough to keep it together, to organize your thoughts and go upon or set upon learning law and applying it to fact. It's a science. And it's hard to learn a science when you're trying to cover your ass from traffic tickets or whatever. The government can apply a lot of pressure simply by telling you, I'm from the government. And I really like to see a lot more caution out there, but a lot more participation. Find a great cause and volunteer your time. There's a bunch of people trying to preserve childhood innocence which died in 1980. Rap is music. But for what it's worth, pitch in. Help them get the word out. And take all that vile crap out of schools. Keep public servants away from children. You have to start somewhere, folks. And if you don't have an education in law, where are you going to start if you want to help? So get involved. You're losing your country. I'm watching it. I've been intently and intensely focused upon government for 35 years. 2001, there wasn't enough of America left to attract me. I haven't been able to leave yet. It's more than 20 years later, and a few people have woken up and gone, hey, where did childhood go? It took you long enough. Parents, it took you long enough. You don't see what pop culture is doing to your children? By the way, on the flash drive, there's a course on how to turn the screws on a teacher that approaches children about sexual education, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. You can't do that in Florida. Thank you, Mr. DeSantis. But what that's called is communication with a minor for immoral purposes. It's a crime. Okay? And you know how much I like criminal complaints. And I could burn a teacher for what they're teaching in class. I don't have any kids, so I don't have a dog in this fight. But I could burn a teacher that teaches as parents saw on these Zoom courses during the COVID lockdown. And criminal complaints is just the start. I would gang up on any such teacher until they were decertified and had to move to another state just to get another job. So there's a course on the flash drive about cleaning up schools. And the other half of that course is about take your mask and shove it. Anti-COVID, anti-vaccine. They got no business telling you got to take that vaccine. It's emergency use. It hasn't been tested on a bunch of humans like all the other vaccines have been. So again, my name's David Merlin. Enjoy life. Keep government away from you, and don't be afraid to go to these meetings, school board meetings. Yeah, there's going to be feds there, but take my course on it. There's case law that says the Fed has no business speaking to you inside of a state until there's probable cause that you violated a federal law. What law did I violate when I cussed out a pervert from the lectern at that school board meeting? That's local, all the way. And the Fed has no business. So study on the periphery until you decide exactly where you want to get involved, and then don't do anything on your own. Get involved with others because they already have a perimeter around them that it presumably is not under assault by the authorities, and show up when they picket and grab a picket sign, you bet, with a full understanding that there are people that want to molest the children, that will have cell phone cameras and who will take photographs of you. But it's time to stand up. You finally got company. The average person has company because people are starting to wake up. Thanks for listening. This is another episode of No Confidence. And thanks in advance for your support. Get the flash drive. It's an incredible library of stuff that I've done, things that I thought was important, not just a general database of a bunch of law you might learn. I'm offensive, I'm aggressive, and meticulous, and my pleadings prove it. And you get an entire database of just what I do if you were to get the flash drive. This has been my pleasure. Stay out of trouble. See you in the next video.